All right, recording is started.
Got it. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Good morning. Nice to meet you all. As Riley mentioned, I am the Executive Director of Federal Relations. So I'm based out here in Washington, D.C. I have a few slides. I'm just going to walk you guys through, if you can bear with me for a second, because I got a new computer. So let's make sure this works. Okay. Now let's see if I can view this. Nope. Hang on one second. Okay, does that work? Can you guys see?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm just going to walk you guys through a bit about our office out here, who we are, what we do, a little bit of the policy work that's happening. And then, as Riley mentioned, happy to talk through some like best practices for engagement at the federal level, and then address any questions you all may have at the end. So for your awareness, we established our office out here in DC in August of 2016. So I just had my 5-year anniversary with our office out here. We're located in the Hall of States building. So we're right in between Union Station and the Senate side of Capitol Hill. So, pre-pandemic and now, kind of as we're transitioning through this, very close to Congress, both the House and Senate side. We have a 2-person team out here. We're actually in a transition period right now. We have our new Associate Director of Federal Relations will be joining us next week, which I'm really excited about. And just one kind of quick thing to note, we are the only federally registered lobbyists for the University of Iowa at the federal level. So a bit about what we do, I kind of view our role in 3 different silos, which I have laid out here. So we work across campus to establish the institution's federal priorities. A big bulk of what we do is the second bullet point here. So we track and analyze all federal legislation, guidance, funding rules, and regulations that could potentially impact the university. And then thirdly, of course, we execute our federal strategy and advocacy efforts on behalf, of the Hawkeyes out here in DC. So my job could not happen if I did not have great collaboration across campus. So I've just listed here, these are not all of them. Our work relies on our relationship with all of these various campus constituencies. Specifically, we work very closely with the Vice President for Research. I'm sure, as you are all aware, this is a huge part of what we do as a university. So I kind of serve as the go-between the federal government and our research portfolio here as it relates to policy, rules, regulations, and things like that. Of course, work very closely with our student leaders as well. And then out here on the federal end, since most of my colleagues are 1,000 miles away, we also work really closely with other higher education association staff out here as well. Of course, our Iowa congressional delegation and their staff, the various committee staff, all of the federal agencies, our university associations, our regent counterparts. So there is a me at UNI and Iowa State who I work very closely with as well. We are also in close communication and collaboration with our Big Ten government relations counterparts and many more. So I just kind of quickly will walk you through, you may or may not know all of this. Keith may talk about this more, but we are going through a redistricting phase right now. But as it stands currently, as of today, these are our 4 congressional districts. We're of course here in District 2. And then I won't read through all of these, but just quickly walk through. Our delegation is relatively small, very red. So we have 2 Republican senators, Senator Ernst and Senator Grassley. I've listed their committees. Senator Ernst is very focused on, agriculture and her role, which we engage with her a lot on armed services, environment, public works, and small business. And then Senator Grassley, of course, given how senior he is, serves on a variety of committees, finance being one of the ones, and judiciary, where he's currently ranking, that he has either been chair or ranking for, I think over a decade. Then moving into our House delegation. So Congresswoman Axne is our only Democrat. She's located down in District 3, which is the Des Moines region and around there. She is on the Agriculture and Financial Services Committee. Congresswoman Hinson, who is District 1, Appropriations and Budget. And we can talk more through any of these later as well, if you have questions. Congresswoman Miller Meeks, of course, is our representative for the university. She is on the Education and Labor Committee, which is really great because that is a committee that has jurisdiction over all higher education policy. We haven't had anyone on that committee for about 10 years, so it's nice that she is on that committee for us. Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs, and she also got appointed to the Select Committee on the coronavirus, so she's been pretty involved in those conversations. And then Congressman Feenstra is our only congressman on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, which is also very important to us given our broad, research funding policy priorities. So, that committee has jurisdiction over things like NSF and NOAA. So quickly, there's a lot here, of course. I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we've been working on at the federal level with the Biden administration as well as Congress. Obviously, there's a massive conversations going on around infrastructure, workforce development, clean energy, climate change, racial equity, research and development, and then generally growing the financial aid portfolio and funding. So now I'll quickly transition, and we can have a bit more of a dialogue on this later, if that is helpful, just around congressional engagement best practices, because I know that is something, my understanding is that your organization is really interested in doing. So I think one of the things that I would point out, the main things that I find to be useful in order to be effective is that going into the meeting, kind of identifying up front what the issue is that you want to discuss with the member of Congress and how it is relevant to their district and their, the state of Iowa, and therefore the member themselves. One of the things I can't really emphasize enough is the personal story. So I always try to tell folks and this is something I think your organization will be really, good at, is how you connect to whatever the issue is. So if you're going in there to talk about, increasing funding for the National Science Foundation, having a story reflect how that funding has impacted you or a colleague's specific work or research you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have that funding, things like that. The second thing I did want to flag is that bullet where I wrote have an ask. The ask could be as simple as continue to support this program, or we have some concerns with this program, or we would love if you could co-sponsor this bill, that type of thing. I have found meetings where there's not a concrete ask, even if the ask again is just continued support, staff tend to kind of disengage a bit because they can't figure out what it is, why are you here, what it is that you want. And sometimes the point of the meeting really is just to convey the work that you're doing, but especially at the federal level, they meaning members and staff, really want that specific tangential tie to the federal portfolio. So what federal program is funding it, and things like that. And then of course, I think the other big thing that is important is to, when you're wrapping up a meeting with staff, to really thank them for everything that they do. We know that staff, I am a former staffer, I spent 6 years over there doing this, do the bulk of the work for Congress. And so really establishing those relationships at the staff level is what I have found to be the most effective. So, strongly expressing your desire to continue a dialogue, even if you leave the meeting thinking like, oh, I don't know if they were listening, or I'm not sure if they got much out of that, and saying you really want to continue the dialogue and offer to be a resource. This is something that pays dividends on the back end. You could go into a meeting, it's quick, they're stressed, they've got stacked meetings. Let's say they have something like 7 meetings a day. You're just one of those 7 meetings. But then 2 weeks from now, the topic you were talking with them about comes up, and they're going to give us a ring and say, hey, I know you talked about this. Can you tell me more? Can you send us feedback on this bill or something like that? So from my vantage point, that is the most important thing, is really creating and establishing these relationships where members and staff rely on us as a resource, because then we are able to provide feedback and kind of strategically help impact policy decisions at that level. And then I just noted a couple things here. You all may be, the second bullet here, members of a variety of different types of professional associations or presidential associations, scientific associations. We, especially in the spring semester, that's when things tend to be most busy out here as far as annual Hill Days, where my office will work to arrange kind of in connection with those meetings with all of the staff out here. So all the Iowa congressional staff or committee staff, depending on who it is you may want to meet with. So those are things to keep an eye out for. And I always ask if folks are engaging at the federal level with an outside organization, and they also want to talk to the Iowa folks, just to let me know, so we're not double tapping the same people to have the same meeting. So those are really good ways, though, to get engaged and kind of crosswalk the, your national associations platform and also what you're doing at the university. And then I have mentioned there Hawkeye Caucus DC. This usually happens every other year because of ongoing COVID restrictions and just everything that has been happening this year out here in DC. We decided to move this virtually for January 2022. So would love to have you all involved in that. We don't quite have that shaped out yet. We don't have a date yet. But we're looking towards the end of January to do like a remote advocacy day instead of having everyone fly out here for that this year. So with that, I think I will stop and turn it over to Keith.
And just figuring out how to do this here. Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, that looks good.
All right, figured that out. So thank you all. And I just want to say thank you for being leaders and taking this on. This is an important thing you're doing, so appreciate it very much. As Riley introduced me before, my name is Keith Saunders. I do the state lobbying on behalf of the University of Iowa. So I'm at the state capitol or on the road with state legislators a lot of the time. Whenever they're in session, I'm in the state capitol. State relations is a little bit different than federal in that we are coordinated through the Board of Regents. I am technically an employee of the board. I have a counterpart for Iowa State and a counterpart from UNI, and we work as a team at the State House. That being said, for all intents and purposes, I'm the U of I guy at the State House. So technically I report to the board, but my heart is with the University of Iowa. So I just sort of, what I deal with mostly is funding for the university. The university gets about $220 million from the state every year. I try and increase that number every year. I also play a lot of defense on policy. Sort of our calendar in a typical year is in the summer, the university and the Board of Regents puts together our legislative ask. The board approves that in September. So our legislative ask this coming year is $7 million. $4 million of that is dedicated to improving the student experience. So there's some money dedicated to mental health, additional mental health resources on campus, additional scholarships for students studying in fields where there is a workforce shortage in the state, and then some additional funds for retention efforts. Students who are struggling right away, trying to help ease that transition, especially for first generation students. We also put some funding in for what we call our service to the state. So our family practice residency program has a request. The flood center located next to the river across the street from the law school, which serves the state, has a small request. The hygienic lab, which has done all the testing for the COVID pandemic, is we're asking for a small bump. So we've sort of put our eggs in two baskets. One, what we do for students, and two, what we do for the state. All those budget requests have now been submitted. The governor, she will put her budget together and announce that or release it on the second day of the legislative session. The legislature looks at it and then throws it away, and then they go ahead and write their own budget. And so we go through the legislative process. The legislative session always begins the second Monday of every January. This year we have a short session, so it's only 100 days. 100 is the goal. So 100 is the number of days that they will pay a per diem. If they don't get their work done in those 100 days, they have to stay in Des Moines on their own dime. So it's a way to put some pressure on them to finish their work up. Just sort of how the process works. We will track probably 400 to 500 bills that are filed every legislative session. Most bills will get a subcommittee, which is a very informal meeting it's essentially a 3 to 5 member group of legislators sitting around a table with lobbyists surrounding them, and we go through the bill together. It's a very, very informal process. Last year, a lot of that moved online. I'm not sure what that's going to look like in the coming year. I'm not sure what COVID's going to do. I'm assuming we're going to get back to a more normal looking legislative session, but that's still up in the air. The legislature puts some deadlines in place to get things moving. So if you pay attention to the Iowa legislature, you'll hear talk about the funnel dates. And those are dates where policy bills have to be at a certain point in the legislative session. And if they don't meet that milestone, it's a way to sort of cull the stuff that's extraneous. So there are deadlines to keep the process moving. As Leanne mentioned, right now we're going through a redistricting process right now. This happens every 10 years after the census is taken. So right now, yesterday, in fact, the state legislature met and rejected the first map, the first attempt at redrawing the map. They now have 35 days to produce another map. What that means is all of these lines are going to change. So our congressional districts will change, and then our House and Senate districts will change as well. So it creates a lot of angst in all of our elected officials because they have no idea what territory they may be representing, and B, they may get thrown into a district with one of their friends or colleagues. So there's a lot of angst right now as to what the future holds for a lot of our elected friends. This is just something I like to show people, that we are a red state. Iowa used to have a reputation of being sort of a purple state, a state that sort of would go back and forth. But over time, we have drifted further and further right. That being said, we have good relationships with Republicans in Iowa. We can work with them in spite of maybe what you heard last session, where we had some bills filed against us. None of those actually were passed. So we are still able to operate in this environment. There's a healthy respect for what we do. But I just like people to know that we are in a red state now. That being said, I'd like to also put this against the last slide. What this shows is that yellow line is appropriations. The black line is tuition, and the gray is other. But what this really shows is over the last generation, since 1981, there's been a flip in how education is funded at the University of Iowa. Whereas a generation ago, the state picked up about 80% of the cost of a typical undergraduate student at the University of Iowa. Now the state only picks up about 30% of that cost, and more burden is then put on tuition. And you can see that, if you overlay this chart with the previous chart, it's not been Democrats or Republicans. This is a national trend that has been happening all across the country of disinvestment in higher education and more reliance on tuition. It's not based on Democrat or Republican. It is just a national trend that has been happening. The best thing I would point out, though, is over the last, you can see 3 or 4 years there, we've been able to stabilize it. So it's not getting worse. And there's, hope that we can start reversing this over the time. But I tell people, I think the lines have shifted, and we're just going to try and hold them where they're at right now. Oops, other way. As far as reaching out to local officials, I'd encourage you guys, if you want to get started, to start with our local delegation. We have a very active local delegation. Zach Walls, the top member there, is the Democratic minority leader in the Iowa Senate. All of these people would be wonderful to reach out to, and this is probably where I'd have you start, is getting to know some of these people, inviting them to some of your meetings. But we have Christina Bohannon is one of our law professors. So this is the group I'd probably have you start with, and then start branching out from there. Just sort of walk you through, there are 4 caucuses, so Democrat, Republican in the House, Democrat, Republican in the Senate. Republicans control both the House and the Senate. In the House, the Republican in the leadership is Pat Grassley. Republicans currently have 59 seats. There's one seat that's open right now because of a resignation, and that special election will be held in a couple of weeks. House Democrats, only 41 seats. Jennifer Confirst is a new leader. She is a communications professor from Drake, so she's very, very familiar with higher education and some of the issues we face. And then in the Senate, that's also controlled by Republicans. They have 32 of the 50 seats. And there's Zach Walls, our minority leader from Coralville. What we do sort of on a daily basis is I'm very active with President Wilson and getting her out to meet with legislators. We bring legislators to campus as well. We also do a lot of white papers on topics that keep coming up. So we try and keep educating legislators as to what we're doing and how we do it. And we also do a ton of email communications to legislators and Facebook and Twitter and all of the social media, trying to highlight for them anytime someone from their district does something remarkable in our campus, and also highlighting every time we do something remarkable in their district. So trying to make them aware of how the university is affecting them. We also do some internal groups. Hawkeye Caucus Day, we do a sort of a corollary event that we do at the federal level. We do ours annually at the State House, though we haven't done it for the last 2 years because of COVID. But we're scheduled to do it this year on Thursday, March 31st. We'd love to have you guys join us as much as possible. This is a day where we try and bring as much of the university to the Iowa Capitol as possible. We'll set you up to meet with some legislators. It's just a good day for us to bathe the state capitol in black and gold. Issues that may be coming up. Funding is always the top issue we deal with. The state is in a relatively good financial position right now, good enough where there's talk of tax cuts. So we like to continue to make the case that before you cut taxes, let's talk about funding some state institutions. Free speech has been an issue we've dealt with. I'm not sure if it'll come back this year. There was a major bill passed last year. We seem to always get drug into whatever is the issue of the day on the culture wars. Right now it's masks and vaccinations. We'll get drug into something there. Admissions to graduate programs and residencies. There's some talk of wanting to up the percentage of resident student slots that are reserved for Iowa residents. That's something we've traditionally resisted. We don't like the legislature getting involved in who can come to the university or making admission decisions. Name, image, likeness, probably not likely to come up. That's related to athletics. Community college transfers is an issue that comes up every now and then. And then with all the athletic conference realignments, there may be some legislation there as well. And that's all I have. The other thing I would say is, Leanne on the federal side really talked about engaging with staff. On the state side, there really isn't any staff for you to engage with. So you'd be dealing directly with the members. And all of the things Leanne said sort of hold true for the state side as well. Know what you're asking for, say thank you. These people, the state legislators make $25,000 a year, which is, they don't get paid enough for the grief they go through. And they don't get thanked enough for the work that they do. So thank them, tell them who you are, what you do, why your work is important to the state of Iowa, and that you would love to stay in the state following graduation. So happy to take questions. And again, just thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you guys both so much for those presentations. They're very informative. I am going to stop the recording right now so we can